Hi guys,
Hmm.
my name is Rakshit. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today with us we have Mr. Ajay Sabharwal. He is founder and president of IYEA, which is Indian Youth Economic Association. He is currently pursuing LLB from Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. So first of all, thank you so much Ajay for joining, and really appreciate it. So
Right.
can you tell us about the organization IYEA a little more on that, and what do you do there?
Sure.
Yeah.
The Indian Youth Economic Association is a non-profit trust
Right.
which primarily focuses on promoting research in economics and related social sciences.
Okay.
My personal role is limited to the capacity of being a founder and the president.
Okay.
And this organization has existed. It's a registered trust.
Okay.
It's existed for around 9 years now. Right?
Okay.
We started off in 2012. The
Right.
formal registration and all of that happened a bit later, right?
Okay.
But we've been operating since then. As I said, we focus on research in economics and social sciences, which there's a broad category which includes largely the humanities as well. So we include history, political science, governance, strategy, law, technology, and how these fields have an interplay with the economy, with
Hmm.
the areas of finance.
Right.
And our larger focus is towards the youth
Okay.
because there is often a gap.
Right.
This was one of the principles for us, that there's a gap that's often left from mainstream education, right? Whether we look at schools or collegiate level, university level education, there's a gap in terms of how we are trained to look at research, how we're trained to look at numbers, how we're trained to look at the news, how we're trained to look at the world.
Right.
Our aim largely is to fill that gap, right? To
Hmm.
prepare students to think for themselves critically
Okay.
and, in one sense, uh, unlearn at times what's a lot of times taught in classrooms, which is at times incorrect. And within this sort of domain, we publish research papers online on our platform, The Agenda. We have an audiovisual podcast series
Right.
under the same platform. And we have institutional tie-ups with various universities and colleges across the world, which focus on youth-based activities and training workshops across different subjects, different areas. And we've held conferences over the years. Some of them include the University of Chicago's conference in 2014, our summit on war and politics in 2016, as well as our conference on law, economics, and technology in 2018.
Okay.
2019, we had one of our panel discussions with two members of parliament. Again, these are only some of the flagship events
Okay.
that the IYA holds by itself. These do not include other events that we hold in partnership as institutional tie-ups with others. Right?
Great.
So that's, I think, broad functioning of all that we do at the IYA.
Okay. Great.
We
You.
also have an
Yeah.
online we also have an online internship mentorship program which has been going on for last few years. Right? We have a pool of mentors who specifically train students in the fields that they choose to be trained in, right? Which focuses on research, academic writing, and a specific field, either economics, strategy, law, or those areas. And these people are obviously qualified in their areas, either academically or having professional experience. And these students are given rigorous training over months, and some of them end up uh, writing papers or publishing their content on our platforms as well.
Great. Great. So you mentioned one thing that you focus on bridging the gap between the finance world and the youth. So I watched one video of Madhav on your channel, the behavioral finance and the asset allocation one, and I found it really
Right.
astonishing that in India we are getting that level of content because I have seen some videos of Gatsad on behavioral economics, finance, etc. But seeing someone teaching behavioral finance in India was really a new experience, and I was glad that someone was doing it in India. And Really appreciate your organization's effort in bridging the gap of finance, economics, law, etc. for the youth. So today we have brought Ajay for discussing the budget. Earlier this week, our finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced the fiscal budget for this year, and we wanted to talk some points about that. So first of all, I wanted to ask that why budget is an important statement for everyone, whether it's a student or a business owner, and can you tell a little introduction about what budget really is?
Right. I'll get to the first part
Okay.
of your question. That is, why is the budget important? Right. Um, the budget is important in two ways, in the sense that at a macro level, it's ultimately about how the government will allocate resources. First, obviously, as to how it will raise resources,
Okay.
right? What we call revenue, right? And then the second aspect of that is expenditure, or
Okay.
how the government would spend that money, at what particular areas, how is that going to change, right? This is at the macro level, because
Okay.
uh, every country, every nation, every sovereign nation has to have a government that runs that country. And for every government to be able to run that, it requires some amount of money.
Right.
And how they balance that money, the inflow and the outflow, where they spend it, how they raise it, is
Okay.
effectively what the budget is. Right?
Okay.
It's um, an annual statement
Hmm.
of where the government puts its expenditure and its revenue uh, before Parliament. Right? This is to be passed as a finance bill. And though all bills are supposed to pass both houses of Parliament, the thing with money bills is that they only need to pass the threshold of the Lok Sabha, where the government's supposed to enjoy majority, right? But we're not
Okay.
getting into the difference between money bills and other bills.
Right.
But coming to the question of what uh, the budget, I believe that part covers at least what a
Right.
budget is, right? It's an
Right. Right.
annual financial statement, plain and
Hmm.
simple. This
Right.
is how we're going to raise money. This is how we're going to spend it.
Right.
I've given you a sense of how it's important at the macro level, right?
Right.
Everyone would like to believe that, okay, the country is running well.
Hmm.
Um, this is the macro indicator of the Indian economy, and this is what's happening in terms of taking that economy forward. And we'd like for the country to do
Right.
well.
Right.
Right? This is at the macro level. At the micro level, it becomes important in the sense that when the government is making these changes,
Right.
uh, in terms of how they choose to spend or how they choose to raise,
Hmm.
how they choose to raise their funds is one of the key factors. There is taxation. Right?
Right.
Taxation comes from either direct taxation on our incomes or indirect taxation. We have the GST and other legislations that help the government raise more funds. Right. So obviously, those businesses which deal in particular areas where there is a particular statement made by the finance minister that the particular tax rate on that commodity is going down, obviously that good becomes cheaper, or you can sort of get it across to the consumers at a cheaper rate. Right? So
Right.
that means it'll sort of sell more. So that's better for those people who are dealing in that. So at the micro level, this is how businesses look at it. Right? Individuals, salaried individuals look at tax slabs changing.
Right.
Right? There are different deductions there and exemptions that come into place that are removed every year. So people look forward to some sort of benefit coming out of that.
Right.
Right. At the same time, the government introduces, let's say, a cess in relation to particular goods for a particular purpose. A cess is
Right.
always for a particular purpose.
Yeah.
So that is spent on a particular area. Those people working within that area look forward to accruing some benefit out of that. That
Right.
there's more expenditure coming from the government in that area. So there are more resources, and as a result, there's some more benefit. So I think that's largely the small stakeholders. Obviously, there's another pool of people who look forward to it at a micro level. That is chartered accountants, tax consultants, advocates,
Right.
right? Whose focus becomes to facilitate that entire process, right? To make it easier for people. And on that level, people look forward to sort of advice from chartered accountants and tax professionals and advocates as to what is the current standing or how am I going to benefit out of that. So
Right.
on that extremely micro level, perhaps they also look forward to it in that sense,
Right.
right? But I think that that broadly covers the questions that you had posed, or is there something that I'm
No,
missing?
no, no. That greatly
Okay.
covers the question that I asked. So tell me that what's this year's main bullet points, or what's the highlights of this year's budget was.
Sure. Again, we won't be going into the
Right.
details of it, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But if you were to ask my personal opinion,
Hmm.
I think a good move is certainly in terms of disinvestment. Right now,
Okay.
that's where government has shown some intent, and at the same time, sure, that intent has been with governments over the years and with finance ministers over the years.
Yeah.
But this year, sort of, there seems to be active movement. At least going just by the statement, we still have to see action in that regard. But
Okay.
I believe that's a good one. I'd say it's an ambitious target, right? All the
Okay.
targets that have been set regarding disinvestment, these are ambitious targets. But if at all the government is able to fulfill, I think that would be a great move, right? Certainly, whether we look at Air India or others, uh, over the years, governments have been putting in more funds,
Hmm.
not necessarily to be able to get the particular undertaking out of the situation it is in, right? But ultimately, it's like it's sunk cost, right? We still keep on sort of putting in more with the hope that okay, there's going to be some return out of it.
Right.
But
But
ultimately, the more we put in, there's a compounding effect in terms of the loss that the taxpayer faces, right? And I'm of the opinion that um, I'm of that school of thought. Perhaps I mean, I'm sure there might be people who might disagree on this. That it's not the government that gives you anything.
hmm.
Right? When you talk about okay, the government's giving out handouts, or the government's giving a bailout, or the government's giving out freebies, it's not the government's money to give. Right?
Right.
Ultimately, it's the money of the people. Right? It's the
Right.
people who pay taxes. Right?
Right.
It's taxpayer money, and it must be respected for what it is. Right? And in that sense, I think specifically in the context of public sector undertakings, there wasn't a lot of need for the government to hold on to these institutions. Sometimes we saw that a particular public sector undertaking has to be, let's say they're going through the privatization process. Not a lot of bids are invited. What do? They get LIC uh,
By
inject funds in. So
yeah.
what's happening, right?
Right.
It's not like the government is letting go of um, the burden.
Hmm.
It's just transferring from one area to another. Right? So you
Right.
can't possibly say that we're moving towards a more robust sense of the government getting out of business. Government is saying, okay, we are running this business, let's transfer it to another business. And
Right.
the
Right.
point of LIC, unfortunately, over the years has become just that, right?
Right.
To sort of cover up for the losses and mismanagement and uh, bad administration. Right? But
Right.
having said that, this is one aspect, and I look at it as a big positive, if nothing
Okay.
else. Right? Sure, there have been thresholds that have increased as we were discussing earlier regarding the thresholds for audited accounts. Right? I think they've been increased from they were earlier 5 crores and increased to 10 crores. Right? The requirement uh, if you're having about 90-95% transactions digital through which are digital transactions, so that's one another aspect. Certainly there is the inclusion of the agriculture and infrastructure cess, right, on gold, silver, alcohol, and other sort of imported commodities, which obviously also in the case of petroleum products, which would be offset by the duty that's otherwise paid on them.
Right.
So it's not like that will lead to an increase in the price of that product necessarily, but there will be a specific part which,
Will be
rather
going
than
to the
going to the funds, goes specifically for the
right.
purpose of agriculture and infrastructure.
Okay. Okay.
Now, while it would be specifically for that. It's not like government wasn't spending funds for that earlier.
Okay.
The fact that it changed is that when we talk about these funds going through the cess, the state governments will not have a claim to it.
Okay. It will directly go to the
So yes, that goes
specific.
directly to the center.
Okay.
So that's one aspect. So there will be a loss in terms of for the states. If you look at it as a zero sum game, it's a loss for them in terms of the revenue that uh, they would have generated.
Right.
Right. So that's another aspect.
Okay.
Um, okay. Were you meaning to move to another point, or
No, no,
do you
no.
want me to? We
So
can move to. It's absolutely fine.
no, no. So currently, you have mentioned two highlights that firstly, the privatization of disinvestment, that
Yes.
government is planning to, disinvest is its businesses because it's not government's role to, run businesses. I believe,
Absolutely.
right? uh,
Absolutely.
because it creates a dilemma for the government because businesses sometimes requires tough decisions and that sometimes mean laying off employees or some things like that. And I also believe that this investment in businesses is a positive step so that government can focus on other things which it's do. And the
Yes.
uh, another point you made was that audit of companies which are doing 95% of their payments in digital is now increased from 5 crore to 10 crores turnover. So that's a great news.
Yes.
That will help in ease of doing business because audit is kind of a uh, tiresome process, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, anyway, right? Like people go ahead with it. Right? The idea is to sort of anyway maintain accounts and that, and but without sort of getting into the specifics in terms of the deficit and all of those aspects, right?
Okay.
Sure, there is a claim that okay, the government is hoping that there'll be 10%, or the estimate is there'll be 10% growth. Um, and to add to that, they're also seeing the deficit. The estimate is that deficits are also going to go down.
Okay.
Again, my intent was not to sort of get into those aspects,
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
mean these
absolutely.
are, I believe, will be common knowledge, and I mean anyone who hasn't even looked at it will at least go with these numbers. But
Okay.
I think another aspect is in the context of the changes that are coming into the securities law scheme. Now, these
Okay.
are some of the changes which aren't necessarily part of, let's say, how the government is spending, but these are the corresponding changes, right? Because like last year, we had those changes within the Companies Act domain in terms of decriminalization of many regulatory offenses, right? If you're
Okay.
not filing a particular document, you shouldn't be going to prison.
Right.
Sure, there can be a penalty for it. There
Right.
can be a slap on the wrist, but you shouldn't be sending someone into prison because okay, a particular document wasn't filed at a particular stage.
Right. It makes
So I think
sense.
that part we had in the Companies Act, I think 2019.
Okay.
Again, there's a series of that coming in through 19, and in the context of, I think it was also in a fair bit of it in 20. I'm not aware of the exact date,
Okay.
but we've seen something similar in terms of I think the partnership, the LLP Act, right? There are also decriminalizing some offenses pertaining to those, as well as I think the securities code. That's what I think was pitched. That there'll be a mention of a Russian securities code, and there will be, obviously there have been some changes that are being brought into the securities regulation, the contracts, the SCR, right, in terms of new aspects that can be included in the alternate investment trusts, which require registration otherwise. So these are sort of new aspects which are coming in. Obviously, it's minute in the sense that we'll not sort of immediately see the tangible
Right.
uh, reaction of it. But certainly, I think we're just providing, or the government in that sense is providing a regulatory framework. They're sort of defining it more aptly or more accurately in that sense. Because over the years, especially the Sahara case and the like, right, there has been there was at least some amount of confusion in terms of how to go about securities
Okay.
regulation, and where does SEBI's jurisdiction come into play. So I think they're just trying to expand it. Sure, the Sahara judgment sort of expanded it a bit, but
Hmm.
they're trying to sort of expand that further, and not just in the fact that these are all things that SEBI can get into. But okay, if you're dealing with these things, you require registration,
Right.
right? How is it, or how were these instruments earlier regulated?
Hmm.
Perhaps there was not sort of a direct answer to that. Not that SEBI didn't sort of have a more innovative way of interpreting its jurisdiction, but as we saw in the Sahara case. But at the same time, I think these aspects are being added, which add significantly to the weightage in terms of just people carrying out these
Okay.
particular actions, right? Like I said, alternate investment trusts and the like. So that part is there. I think these are quite decent moves. That we can't sort of get into
Okay.
the fact that these moves are controversial in any sense. So
Okay.
this just
Okay.
sort of moves in a particular in the right direction.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it also sends a message that government wants some change, that it is looking after it. Uh, another uh, Another thing I wanted to
Yeah.
ask,
Sorry.
is any other
Hmm.
highlight you want to mention from the budget that may impact our economy in a way?
Hmm. I think
Okay.
we've covered a fair chunk of
Okay, okay. So I will
we've
move
covered
on
a
to
fair chunk of it.
questions. So
Sure.
the news today broke that Tesla invested $1.5 billion in Bitcoin, right? And earlier
Hmm.
this week, while the budget was yet to announce, the news was spreading that India is trying to ban cryptocurrency and will try to bring its own cryptocurrency. So I heard a comment from Balaji Srinivasan, who is a venture capitalist in America. So he said that in 2008, right, the banking system failed us and government bailed them out by our own money. So Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are a good step in decentralization, and it will, enable the economy as a whole. It's the future of how the money will operate, and India should look not to try the not to ban cryptocurrency, because then it will, India will let back in the future. uh, what do you think, what are your opinions, that should cryptocurrency be banned, or anything you want to say around that?
Okay. So those are sort of two, 3 points there.
Okay.
I think if you look at the background of the issue,
Hmm.
uh, we had the earlier RBI circular
Right.
where the Reserve Bank had, in its role as a regulator, had told the banking sector that you will not be permitted to, or you're not authorized to deal with any exchange or any entity dealing in virtual
Cryptocurrency.
currencies.
Right, right.
Now, that was challenged before a
Supreme
few
Court.
high courts, and ultimately the matter was clubbed together at the Supreme Court. And in March, the Supreme Court delivered its judgment and struck down the RBI's circular.
Right.
Now, the government at that point had not brought in any law.
Hmm.
That is, the parliament had not passed any legislation.
Hmm.
This was a circular by the RBI.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court, the bench of 3 judges,
Hmm.
said that we have to look at any sort of regulation, especially those which are prohibitions. That is, in this case, they're saying banking industry just can't deal with anyone who's dealing with crypto.
Okay.
Have to be seen through the prism of proportionality.
Hmm.
Right? That you have a certain objective in mind,
Hmm.
you want to fulfill it. The method to fulfill it, or the means, the whatever regulation you are bringing in, has to be proportionate.
Okay.
Right? Again, I'm not getting into the law aspect of it.
Right,
I'm
right.
not dwelling deep into that legal principle.
Hmm.
But ultimately, at that point, because there was no legislation,
Hmm.
and at the same time, the Supreme Court had thought that okay, this is an extreme measure, right? Or the fact that it's a disproportionate measure. Why? Because the government had not banned cryptocurrency.
Hmm. Right.
Because they hadn't banned cryptocurrency, there was no grounds for the RBI to say that okay, when you're giving banking services to the entire world,
Hmm.
you can't give banking services to people within this small group of virtual currency exchanges.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So that's the context in which that judgment came. This was, I think, is in
Okay.
March 2020. Right now, what we're hearing, and this is through the agenda that at least I think PRS and all have shared,
Okay.
is that there is in talks, there is and I believe there's also Minister of State for Finance or the Union Minister of Finance made statements that they're looking at bringing in a bill to regulate cryptocurrencies in
Okay.
India. And I believe, from what I've read and heard,
Hmm.
is that the only currency that will be allowed will be one that is officially sanctioned or authorized by the government, right?
Okay.
Which is a digital rupee of sorts.
Hmm.
And private cryptocurrencies will be banned. Right?
Okay.
Again, I haven't seen the text of the legislation. This is
Okay.
only from what we've heard in terms of a short excerpt
Okay.
from
Okay.
PRS and other news outlets. So we don't know how this is going to be framed. What is the meaning of private? Right?
Right.
In that
Right.
sense, is it privately owned?
Hmm.
Because if you define it that way, then a
Right.
cryptocurrency like Bitcoin,
Is not
right, which does
privately
not
owned.
have a centralized ownership,
Right.
could not possibly fit into that.
Right.
However, if the parliament is to define it as anything that is not the government currency, then obviously everything apart from that digital rupee is going to
Yeah.
uh,
Does not
fall
fall
under the
into.
category of
Right.
of that
Hmm.
private currency. Everything is going to be banned.
Right.
Now, while it's possible for multiple altcoins and multiple cryptocurrencies which are extremely centralized and which have one entity issuing them and which are controlled by small interests, but it's possible for the government to sort of, let's say, go after those particular foundations or organizations that issue those cryptocurrencies. It is not going to be possible for the government to go after Bitcoin as an
Right.
entity,
Right.
right?
It's not
Because there's
possible.
no one entity that controls it or runs it, right? You have to
Right.
shut down the internet practically. But from what I've heard is that even owning and keeping cryptocurrencies is going to be banned, right?
Okay.
I believe that some earlier discussions by the committee and earlier variants of some draft said that there will be some punishment attached to that as well,
Okay.
right? That you hold. Now, this is about sort of your average Joe consumer, right?
Hmm.
Who I don't think everyone believes in, right? So there's a group of people who believe in the idea that okay, you need to have decentralized money,
Right.
and central banks have been printing a lot of money, and that's why we get into Bitcoin, because it's in that sense a digital gold, right? That's
Right.
one line
Right.
of argument, and that's why you get the likes of Tesla investing,
Hmm.
or let's say MicroStrategy and those funds investing, in the sense that they see it as the future gold, right? As
Right.
a treasury component,
Hmm.
that X amount or X percentage of our treasury will be in Bitcoin, just as governments today hold a significant amount of the treasury reserves through gold,
Hmm.
right? So
Right.
that's one angle. A lot of people, small consumers, spending, let's say, a few thousand rupees into cryptocurrency, don't do it. Sure, some might do it with an ideological bent. Okay, fine. Because of inflation, because of free printing money, we need some robust money, right? A store of value which is not centrally controlled, which just
Right.
can't be printed
Right.
at the whims and fancies of central bankers.
Hmm.
But like I said, right, there are people who just want to get into it to make a quick buck.
Right. Just,
And say, okay,
right.
fine, this is something that goes up because of the nature of the structure, right? Some might, and I think it comes from a very understandable heuristic
Hmm.
where people say, okay, cryptocurrency is fugazi, fugazi, pixie dust, right? That it's a Ponzi and it's in thin air. That's a very understandable position.
Right. Right.
As someone who would be against any sort of banning of crypto, as someone who would be sort of supportive of sort of blockchain technology and utilization of cryptocurrencies. I think it's very understandable that people come with that view
Hmm.
for the simple reason that they come from certain experiences.
Right.
On the face of it,
Right.
uh, it just seems too good to be true.
Right. Right.
And oh, something is going to keep on going up. Oh, so the supply is going to keep on going, or the rate at which the supply increases is going to be decreasing.
Right.
Having said that, even without getting into the fact that you'd be making criminals out of people who are just spending
Hmm.
a few rupees to so sell something at a higher rate at a later stage, I think what's going to be an even bigger problem is for the government to enforce a law like that.
Right.
How is the government, for once I say, okay, you ban all Indian exchanges,
Hmm.
you don't let them operate. Right?
Hmm.
So, fine, maybe the kind of exchanges or some wallet service that they offer, people will at some point transfer it to some other wallet.
Right.
Right?
Use
Or the
VPN, something
exchanges
like that.
before they close will perhaps sell it out and will sort of return INR back to
Hmm.
the consumers.
Right.
But the execution of this requires the government to investigate each and every mobile phone, each and every tablet, each and every hard drive, what's called, I think, cold storage,
Right.
right?
Right.
Each and every computer
Hmm.
to be able to see who holds cryptocurrency.
Right.
Right? One way of the government doing it is okay, going to these exchanges saying, listen, uh, give us the records of everyone who's bought and sold.
Hmm.
And they will happily comply.
Right.
Right? Then the government can sort of go after them in that sense. But then what do you achieve out of that? Right?
Right.
On one level, if at all, I'm not saying this is the only way, but a viable way is the government says, all right, you're in it to make some quick bucks. Some of you will even make it.
Hmm.
Right? I'm not talking about the sort of fraudster scams where people sort of have these pump and dump schemes. I'm not
Hmm.
talking about the people who create their own cryptocurrencies out of thin air, shit it out to the public, sell, and then get out of it.
Right.
Right?
Hmm.
I'm not talking about that sort of stuff. I'm just talking about people who, let's say, invested in Bitcoin, right? Those sort of common folk.
Okay.
What the government can do is they say, okay, fine, we're creating this mechanism for you. Ultimately, these very exchanges, you can use them to sell your cryptocurrency. And post that, we can levy something like, let's say, a capital gains tax.
Hmm. Right.
Right?
Right.
And the government can take its cut out of that in terms of the capital gains tax. And then move on with it.
Hmm.
But there's a larger problem, which I think no government in the world would be willing to accept,
Okay.
is that ultimately things such as Bitcoin are a means to move away the scope and functioning, the sovereign function, as we call it.
Right. Right.
On some level, the idea that I control the money supply as a central bank
Hmm.
is a given. It
Right.
is to be taken for granted.
Huh.
Right? That पैसा तो सरकार ही छापेगी, right?
Right.
But there is a possible alternative to it.
Hmm. Right.
And that as an idea threatens much more than mere tax revenue.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I think it's not on the economic angle.
Hmm.
It's more in the sense that when we talk about Max Weber, when we talk about the government is effectively what? The sovereign is he who has the monopoly over the legitimate use of force.
Hmm.
Right? And therefore they tax and therefore everything flows from that. The idea that there can be a parallel money
Hmm.
which the governments do not control.
Right. Scares the government.
Absolutely. It will scare
Right.
anyone who is part of or derives their sense of being from that bureaucratic
Authority.
structure.
Right.
Having said that, having said that, it's still, I do not know, right, for the very few years that I've been following this
Hmm.
and I've been reading about this, I don't know how governments will effectively say that we will be able to demolish this completely.
Hmm.
Because the effective requirement for that would be to shut down the internet,
Internet. Right.
right?
Hmm.
Or you go to every house you go to every building, you go to every office complex that desires to run a Bitcoin node. You just need one.
Right.
Right? So I am not even on the fact that okay, the merits of it. I am very openly saying I'm against it on merits. Right? I
Okay.
don't support the idea of banning
Hmm.
cryptocurrency, but I'm on another higher point. I
Right.
don't think the government can do it.
Right. Right.
Right?
Right.
Sure, you might get a couple of hits, you make people suffer in the
Hmm.
sense that they would be forced to sell at some point of time, or you seize the wallets that you have on exchanges, right? But the old school, which doesn't even trust that method of exchanges and online wallets and all of that, which is in this cold storage, or those wallets which are not on exchanges,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
People who have their cryptocurrencies secured at those places, how's the government ever going to come after them?
Right. There is no possible way to do that. Right.
Right? Sure. I mean, there's going to be hit and try. Like I said, you go to every house, you
Right.
go to every place that a Bitcoin node or a particular computer machinery has been sold to be able to mine Bitcoin or to run a node.
Right.
But if that is the priority of the government, then I'm sure that we have much larger concerns um, to take care of. Right. So I think that's the sort of key area. Sure, we had Tesla revealed through its SEC filing that
Hmm.
it has invested 1.5 billion USD in aggregate terms over the time of sort of purchasing Bitcoin, and that they're open to buying other digital assets from time to time, and they're also willing to accept
You're
uh,
right. Cryptocurrencies as their payment
Bitcoin as
gateway.
payment
Hmm.
for sale of the goods that they sell,
Hmm.
which they say they might sell or not, right? In terms of either in cash right there and then, or
Hmm.
just keep the currency as it is,
Okay.
right? So that obviously is in a different context in the United States. I think that SEC filing is required if that leads to increase in the price. But as
Okay.
far as the regulation bit of your question is concerned, I think that wouldn't have much relation there.
Hmm.
And I've given you my two bits on
Right.
what I believe about the regulatory bit.
Those were some quite insightful views. I think everyone who must be listening must have their concept cleared about the speculation about the cryptocurrency, the news that came. So, one last question from you.
Yeah.
In 2020, some of us discovered, or some of us, faced one of the most financial, most drastic financial crisis that in our lifetimes, because most of us listening to this podcast must be teenagers. uh, 2008 happened, but we were kids right at that time. So economy sank to much an extent. Now it is recovering. So what do you see that, uh, how do you think the next 5 years or next 2 years look after the last year? Because it was certainly one kind of events that happened last year. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. So I think implicitly uh, you've sort of given the answer,
Okay.
because you say that in comparison to last year, how will the next few years be?
Right.
Uh, I am no maestro in terms of predictions, but I'm sure I can see that it'll be better than last year,
Right. Right.
right?
Definitely.
And not getting into sort of semantics here, or being sort of all hopeful, but purely from a numbers point of view, right?
Hmm.
When the base is so low, the subsequent rise will obviously be a higher
Hmm.
percentage.
Right.
Right? Sure, but I think the larger point that I think you also wanted to drive home was when is it that we go back to pre-COVID levels? Right?
Right.
Just
Right.
because we have a high rate of
Growth.
growth
Hmm.
in the year post-COVID
COVID. Right.
does not necessarily mean that we are going back to uh, the
Pre-COVID times.
pre-COVID levels. Right? Sure, that will take some time.
Okay.
Right. Needless to say, there will be areas that will require trust to build up for people to be able to spend in those sectors, right? I think tourism being one of the most key sectors of this kind,
Hmm.
where especially international tourism and the like. So it's not going to be easy for those sectors to recover in a jiffy. Right? They're going to take some time because ultimately there is a trust factor. Right? For any sector to develop, there has to be a trust factor from the consumer side. Okay, I'm going to be safe. Right?
Right.
I'm going to be safe. I remember when we had the terrorist attacks in Bombay,
Hmm.
the 26/11 attacks.
Hmm.
Post that, tourism sector suffered a similar hit. Right?
Okay.
Why?
Okay.
Because there was a sense of mistrust. Right? There's a sense of there's a lack of stability
Hmm.
or lack of predictability, if I may. Right? So these things go hand in hand.
Hmm.
As
Right.
people sort of realize that okay, fine, the numbers are going down. There's recovery. People are taking the vaccine. Then people realize, okay, fine. Uh, now I might be able to, let's say, travel. That I might be able to sort of indulge in leisurely travel and
Right.
tours. And
Right.
that's why sort of these sectors will take some time to recover. Ultimately, that's the nature. We very often say that, okay, next is going to be better. But the
Hmm.
assumption there always is that, okay, um, there will be a fast recovery. Everything, all that is lost ground will be recovered next year.
Right.
But that's the thing. Uh, there is always a requirement of time, right?
Hmm.
Because you have to build up that trust all over again. You have to build up that predictability. You have to build up that stability, and that can never happen all of a sudden. That
Hmm.
takes some time. And obviously, I think there have been ample efforts by state governments across the country, by the central government, and without a doubt, by the medical community, right? Doctors, nurses, everyone working in that area. And once there is more trust coming back into, and I think that's slowly happening
Right.
because the number of active cases has gone down. If you go by the figures, I'm sure that there's a group of people who just not want to touch the figures either, and which is also understandable, right?
Right.
Which is understandable. There's always a healthy dose of skepticism, specifically in terms of government figures. Uh, but
Okay.
yes, as trust builds up, uh, we will be sort of moving towards the path of recovery and hopefully get better than sort of pre-COVID levels. But that's not going to be restricted to just the vaccine. If you
Hmm.
want a better pre-COVID levels, there has to be more movement in terms of uh, sort of more economic activity,
Okay.
which is not only going to come from the fact that okay, everyone's vaccinated, everyone can move around.
Okay.
Ultimately, a strong positive that we've seen is, at least in two terms, one, the process of digitalization,
Hmm.
right? That people can, people have been told, listen, now this job can be done from your home.
Right.
This
Right.
job can be done through a Zoom call. We
Hmm.
don't need to
Meet in
be
person.
physically present, right? So one thing that's happened is that the move towards work from home or a more digital approach to day-to-day work, that process, sure, it was happening before COVID as well, but that has picked up pace, and
Okay.
that will definitely have an impact on the economy. Sure, I think for countries like India, where you have high skilled labor, at the
Hmm.
same time, it's relatively cheaper in comparison to at least the developed economies. Those firms out there will say, okay, fine. If there's no requirement for anyone to be physically present here,
Right.
and the same job can be done by someone sitting in India at a relatively lower cost,
Hmm. Right.
why not give it a shot?
Right.
Right. So we're already seeing this in terms of states within the United States, right, where sort of Wall Street companies, Wall Street firms are looking at shifting out of New York.
Hmm.
We're going to even Florida. Why?
Right.
Because
They
sure,
call
there
it
was a
mass
concept of
exodus. Right.
status.
Right.
Yes, but now they realize, listen, the costs. There's a significant difference in terms of cost, right?
Right.
And once you take that argument to its logical conclusion, a good chunk of that business should be coming India's way.
Right. Right.
So in that sense, but yes, that's not going to come only with vaccines, only with companies realizing, okay, India can do the same thing Indians can do the same thing sitting at home.
Hmm.
But that's going to come when we create that environment. Sure, the
Right.
environment is being created, but merely by ticking boxes in the list of what makes it easier to do business,
Hmm.
determined by some international yardstick, is not how business becomes easier, right?
Okay. Right. Right.
At this
Absolutely.
point, our intention cannot possibly be that we just look at gaming the system or gaming the ranking system,
Hmm.
but to make tangible differences.
Right.
Right. So, specifically in the context of the GST, I often bring this example up that um now in the lockdown during this COVID year, there was a significant decrease in economic activity, and as a result, in terms of the tax collection.
Hmm.
Right?
Right. Right.
And we've been seeing trends of um, notices being sent to small businessmen in terms of how they invoiced uh, a particular item, right? And it's not just that okay, they're being sent notices in terms of the fact that this is a violation of the GST Act,
Okay.
but the fact that there is criminal penalty for this and people
Oh,
are being put into prison.
that's very sad. Right.
Right. So the idea, sure, there are times where people, if at all they have committed fraud, whatever the process is, you follow that, right?
Hmm.
But you cannot say that on one end you are trying to decriminalize all of the civil offenses, so to say, or the offenses under the Companies Act, and at the same time you say, okay, now you utilize the GST Act
Hmm.
to go after the smaller businessman,
Hmm.
right? That's not creating an environment which makes business easier,
Hmm.
right? That's just adding stress, and you're disincentivizing people
Right.
to invest.
Right.
And I think that's the key approach, because if we want that post-COVID recovery at a decent pace, that is something that needs to be looked at. Sure, people are of the opinion, you have a lot of economists writing every now and then, no, government needs to spend more, government needs to spend more. Sure,
Hmm.
that argument has to be taken on its own merits. I'm not denying that there is a requirement of government to spend more, but I think this is a place where I might differ with many economists who've been writing. I'm sure there are people on both sides of the idea that there is not just a requirement for sort of okay, there's welfare
Hmm.
certainly. Um, in India is a country that's developing, and there's a requirement for welfare payments or like. But ultimately, if you're looking at the multiplier effect, if you want, okay, the government expenditure to have a multiplier effect, and for that expenditure to facilitate economic growth, there has to be investment in infrastructure,
Right.
right? In building
Absolutely.
infrastructure. So that's I'm not sure of who the particular author was, but I think just today or yesterday, I think it was the Indian Express or the Hindu, where there's a particular focus on the government needs to spend more. This is a missed opportunity. There's a time for aggressive consolidation, but this is not the time.
Hmm.
I think there can be a contrary opinion to that as well. We don't
Okay.
necessarily have to have uh, expenditure for the sake of having expenditure. Right?
Right.
We don't want to crowd private investment either.
Hmm.
So, but at the same time, so this is a point which is getting out of COVID. There are areas where the government will be spending more, needless to say. But as I said, these are my biases. This is my personal opinion that the best way for the government is to sort of cut on fiscal deficit. Sure, maybe there can be an exception for times such as COVID, most
Hmm.
certainly. And I think that's the point that the author therein has made.
Okay.
And certainly, I think, again, we are sort of staying away a bit from the broader topic.
Okay. No
Uh,
problem. Yeah.
right. Yeah, so I think I'll just sort of come back. We don't
Okay.
have to get into uh, the prudence of fiscal consolidation. But yes, I think that recovery path will move forward. Nonetheless, I think, to quote Mr. Junjunwala, I'm also always bullish on India, and that's a position I wouldn't stay from.
Okay, great, great. That was a quite insightful conversation with Mr. Ajay. I think the listeners must have found much value from the conversation. So before going, I request all the listeners to do subscribe to the agenda by IYEA. There is some amazing content out there, and you will love it. So Ajay, any closing remarks or anything you want to share with the listeners?
No, no. I think I've spoken enough. A
Okay.
tad bit too much from my side.
No,
But
no.
thank you so much, Rakshit, for having me here. It's indeed a pleasure, and I wish you the very best.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.